The rain hadn't let up for hours when Officer Darren Blake turned down the service road near mile marker 47. A trucker had reported what looked like a large dog struggling in the ditch, but with the storm battering the county since dawn, the dispatcher hadn't expected anyone to respond right away. Darren did. He wasn't supposed to be on patrol, just filling in after a shift swap, but something about the call got under his skin. He'd seen enough dogs dumped on the side of the road to know most didn't survive long out here, and with the weather like this, time mattered. The headlights cut through the mist, just enough for him to spot a shape ahead, low to the ground. Still, at first he thought it might be a log washed down from the woods, but then it twitched. His heart kicked. He slammed the car into park, threw on the flashers, and bolted out into the downpour. What he found made his blood run cold. A German shepherd, barely conscious, soaked to the bone, and shivering so hard, his teeth clacked. Mud covered most of his body, but Darren could see the bones beneath the fur, ribs that stuck out sharp, hips sunken deep. One leg was twisted under him unnaturally, but it wasn't the injury that made Darren freeze. It was the rope. A rough, weather-beaten cord was wrapped tightly around the dog's back leg, cutting deep into swollen skin, and fastened to that rope, soaked but still sealed in plastic, was something that made Darren's hands tremble. A small, waterproof pouch. He carefully unclipped it and peeled open the seal, his fingers numb from rain. Inside was a folded note, handwritten, shaking with water damage but still legible. He read it once, then dropped to his knees. His name is Ranger. Please don't leave him. He stayed with me until the end. If you're reading this, I couldn't take him any further. I'm sorry. Please give him a chance. There was no name, no phone number, no explanation, just those words, and a desperate final plea scratched below in uneven handwriting. He's good. He's better than I ever was. Darren swallowed hard, blinking the rain from his lashes. The dog, Ranger, opened his eyes just a sliver. There was no fear there, only exhaustion, and something else, something that felt like waiting. Darren called it in. This is Unit 7. I've got a live animal, likely abandoned, possible abuse. Case, he's injured and not mobile. I need immediate veterinary backup at my location. By the time the shelter's emergency vet team arrived, Ranger was barely holding on. The EMTs tried to lift him with a stretcher, but when one of them reached toward the note still clutched in Darren's hand, the dog growled softly, not violently, not with rage, with purpose. He didn't want to be separated from it. They loaded him into the van, the pouch placed gently beside him. Darren followed behind in his cruiser, eyes never leaving the rear doors. Something about this case felt different, personal, like the dog hadn't just survived something terrible, but had been chosen to carry something forward. The clinic was ready when they arrived. Dr. Helen Strauss, the senior veterinarian on duty, met them at the doors. She was calm, focused, and quiet as she examined Ranger, her gloved hands moving over his frame. Deep tissue damage on the leg, she murmured. Possibly nerve compression, starvation, dehydration, but his heart rate strong. Darren passed her the note. She read it slowly. Her brow furrowed, then her lips parted slightly. He waited for someone, she said under her breath. That's what this is. Over the next several hours, Ranger was stabilized. They cleaned him, started fluids, carefully removed the rope, and treated the raw wound beneath. The moment they placed him in a clean kennel, he curled into a tight ball, the plastic pouch tucked between his front legs like something sacred, and when they tried to move it, he placed his paw on top of it, like it belonged to him. Helen sat beside his crate as the shelter began to quiet for the night. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way he flinched only when thunder shook the windows. She'd treated hundreds of dogs, abandoned, broken, forgotten, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Ranger hadn't just survived. He'd been entrusted, and whoever had tied that note to his leg hadn't just been trying to save him. They'd been trying to say goodbye. But Ranger wasn't done waiting. Not yet. The morning after Ranger arrived, the shelter was unusually still. Even the dogs in the kennel rows seemed quieter, sensing something had shifted. Dr. Helen Strauss hadn't slept. She'd stayed in her office with the medical chart in one hand and the note from Ranger's leg in the other. It was worn now, despite being sealed in plastic, as if the weight of its words had soaked in deeper than the rain ever could. He stayed with me until the end. She couldn't stop replaying that line. At sunrise, she returned to the clinic and found Ranger exactly where she'd left him, head resting on his front legs, his injured back leg still elevated by a soft sling. The pouch remained tucked beneath his paw. His eyes fluttered open when he saw her, slow and steady. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Helen knelt beside the kennel. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you?" Ranger blinked once. Later that morning, Officer Darren Blake returned with a bag of donated supplies, towels, canned food, and a new collar he'd picked out himself. Not because the shelter asked him to, but because he hadn't been able to. Shake the image of that dog in the ditch. It haunted him. The soaked fur, the broken leg, and that quiet, terrible patience in Ranger's eyes. He stepped into the clinic and saw Helen reading the note again. "Anything?" he asked. "No name. No signature. Just this." She handed it to him, but he didn't need to reread it. He'd memorized every word. "I ran the timestamp," he said. "Checked missing persons, vet records, even local eviction filings in the area near the service road. Nothing. It's like the person vanished." Helen looked down at Ranger through the glass. Maybe he wanted to. Darren hesitated. Or maybe he didn't think anyone would go looking. That afternoon, Helen took a photo of Ranger and the note and posted it to the shelter's page, with a caption that simply read, "He didn't run. He stayed. He protected something that mattered. Now we need help finding out who he was waiting for." It spread faster than they expected. Within hours, thousands had shared it. Comments flooded in. People from other states, other countries, offering support, money, and stories of dogs who had done the same. But none of them recognized the note. No one came forward claiming Ranger. That silence stung more than anyone admitted. Still, Ranger improved. Slowly. He began eating again. He let Helen clean the wound around his leg without protest. And once, during a quiet afternoon when the shelter was nearly empty, she sat on the floor just outside his kennel and read the note aloud, not because he needed to hear it, but because she did. "He stayed with me until the end." She stopped, voice cracking. Ranger lifted his head. "I think you stayed because he couldn't." She didn't know why she said it. It just felt true. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the shelter closed its front doors for the day, a delivery came. An unmarked envelope with no return address, just Helen's name in neat, blocky handwriting. Inside was a small photo. A boy, maybe 18 or 19, holding a German shepherd in his arms. Not Ranger, a younger version of him. Same eyes, same face, same look of calm loyalty. On the back, written in faint pencil, "His name is Ranger. If you see him, tell him I tried." Helen's hand trembled. She called Darren immediately. He arrived within 15 minutes and studied the photo for a long time before speaking. "That's him," he whispered, "the one who wrote the note." "Has to be. But why send this anonymously?" Helen asked. Darren sat down slowly. "Because he's still running." That night, Helen sat beside Ranger again. She showed him the photo. "He didn't forget you," she said softly. Even when the world tried to erase him, Ranger moved closer to the glass. He pressed his nose against it, and for the first time since he arrived, he let out a sound, a soft whine. Helen didn't cry. She just placed her hand against the glass and whispered, "We're not done yet. We're going to find him." Ranger closed his eyes, not from pain, but relief, because even after being left in the cold, tied with a goodbye, and nearly forgotten, someone was still reading the message. And someone was listening. The photo changed everything. For days, Helen had stared at it between appointments, letting her mind run in circles. The boy in the image looked young, painfully young and tired, in the way that didn't come from sleepless nights, but from carrying something heavier than most people his age had ever known. His arms were wrapped around Ranger, back then, a puppy with oversized ears and a gangly frame. And the way the boy looked at the camera said everything. That dog wasn't just a pet. He was all he had. Helen and Darren spent the rest of that week working quietly in the background. They didn't talk about the photo unless they were alone, didn't mention the note anymore out loud around the shelter. It had become sacred somehow, a thread still, tying Ranger to a person whose name they didn't yet know, a person who had walked into the shadows and left behind a message with one last heartbeat of hope. Darren expanded the search. He drove out to nearby hostels, soup kitchens, and halfway houses, with a copy of the photo in his glove box. He never showed it around loudly, just held it in his hand, waited for a flicker of recognition in the faces that passed. Most people hadn't seen him. But one woman, a nurse at a mobile clinic, paused for a long time before shaking her head. "I think he was here. Came in with a limp, no ID, wouldn't speak much. Asked if dogs were allowed. I told him no." Darren's jaw clenched. "Did he leave alone?" She nodded slowly. "But he didn't cry. That's what stuck with me. You'd expect a kid like that to break down. But he just looked down, whispered something like, "I'll meet you at the last place we were safe." Then he left. Those words echoed for days. The last place we were safe. It wasn't much to go on, but Helen and Darren began combing the intake notes, looking for anything that mentioned an earlier interaction with Ranger. And buried deep in the archives, they found it. 9 months earlier, a German Shepherd puppy had been brought in temporarily through a youth foster support program. It was a trial project. At-risk teens were given rescued dogs to care for under supervision. The idea was to teach responsibility, empathy, and to build trust with another living being. The kid's first name? Kieran. No last name, no home address. Just a contact note marked inactive and a sentence, returned to agency custody after family placement failed. But the dog? Ranger. Same markings, same registration chip. That meant one thing. Kieran hadn't just raised Ranger. He chose him. He'd cared for him, fed him, built a bond through all the noise and instability. And when that placement broke, the system separated them. That would have been the end for most kids. But not Kieran. He found him again, and when he couldn't hold on, he made sure Ranger was sent forward with a message that would outlive him. Helen sat with that truth for hours. She thought about how many dogs she'd treated, how many people had walked away when things got hard. But this boy hadn't walked away. He'd walked behind, letting the dog go first, letting hope go ahead of him. That night, Ranger started pacing. It wasn't frantic or panicked. It was intentional. His injured leg was healing now, his limp reduced to a cautious step, and he moved around his kennel with a restlessness that no one could explain. When Helen entered with his evening medication, he didn't go to the blanket or the bowl. He went to the glass door, sat upright, and looked at her, waiting. "What is it?" she whispered. He nudged the plastic pouch where the letter had once been, then nudged the door again. "You want to leave?" she asked gently. "Not from here." "From this part?" He let out a small huff. So she opened the door. They stepped outside into the cool dusk, Ranger walking slowly beside her. No leash, no harness, just trust. He led her, not far, just to the edge of the parking lot, where the trees began to thicken. Then he stopped, sat, looked up at the stars just beginning to peek through the fading blue. Helen knelt beside him. "This is where you met last, isn't it?" Ranger didn't move, because somewhere out there he knew. Kieran was still watching the horizon, still holding on to the hope that someone had answered the message he left behind, and Ranger was still waiting for him to come back for the ending they were promised. Not one written in fear, but in return. The call came in just before midnight, long after Helen had shut down the exam rooms and gone home. The shelter's after-hours emergency line flashed once, then rang again. It was Darren. "I think I found him," he said, voice tight. Helen didn't ask who. She knew. Darren had been canvassing the area near the old train yard, an abandoned stretch of land filled with rusting machinery, graffiti-tagged walls, and the broken skeletons of loading docks. He hadn't expected anything that night, but a clerk from a gas station nearby had called in a tip. A quiet kid had come in, damp, shivering, asked for bandages and dog food, said he didn't need a place to stay, just wanted to get back to someone waiting for him. The clerk hadn't thought much of it until he recognized the photo Darren had left behind. "He's in the warehouse behind the station," Darren told her. "You coming?" She was already grabbing her coat. They drove in silence until they reached the lot. The warehouse loomed dark, its windows fogged and shattered in places. Darren killed the headlights and nodded toward the door. "He's not running this time." Inside, the air was cold and heavy. Flashlight beams danced across the walls, catching old pallets and torn sleeping bags. Then, movement. A figure in the corner crouched low, thin frame, hood pulled low. When Darren stepped forward and called out, the boy didn't move. He just raised one hand slowly and pointed behind him. "She's not mine," he said. "I just found her." Behind him, a puppy, tiny, shivering, barely 6 weeks old, lay curled in a box lined with a threadbare jacket. "Kieran." Darren approached slowly. "We're not here to arrest you, son. We're here because Ranger's waiting." At the name, Kieran's whole body flinched. Then his head lifted just slightly, and for the first time, Helen saw the face from the photo. Older now, bruised, with exhaustion, but still there. Still him. "You found him?" he whispered. "We didn't," Helen said gently. "He found us." Kieran's lips trembled. "Is he okay? Did he keep the note?" Helen nodded. "He wouldn't let us take it." He kept it under his paw for days. Kieran's eyes filled, and he sank to the ground. I didn't want to leave him. I swear I didn't. But people were after me. I couldn't keep both of us safe. We know, Darren said. You didn't fail him. You saved him. It took over an hour to convince Kieran to come with them. Not because he didn't want to. He just didn't believe he could. But eventually, with the puppy wrapped in Helen's arms and Darren guiding him gently by the shoulder, they got into the car and drove back to the shelter. When they opened the back doors, Ranger was already up. He'd been sleeping, but some instinct, had snapped him awake. He stood at the kennel gate, ears forward, tail completely still. When Kieran stepped inside, everything changed. Ranger let out a sound none of them had heard before. A single, low, whimpering cry followed by a deep, guttural exhale. His whole body shuddered as he pressed against the door. Kieran dropped to his knees. "Hey, buddy," he choked. "I told you I'd try." Helen opened the gate. Ranger didn't. "Charge forward." He walked, carefully, like every step was part of a ceremony. When he reached Kieran, he rested his head against his chest, and Kieran collapsed into him, arms around his neck, sobbing. The shelter didn't move. No one said a word. It was too sacred. Later, after Ranger was settled and Kieran had been given food, a warm blanket, and a real bed for the first time in months, Helen sat beside him. He had the note in his hand again, the original, still creased and water-stained. "I thought I'd die out there," he said. "But I wasn't scared for me. I was scared that no one would read it." Helen smiled. "We didn't just read it. We listened." Kieran looked down. "I wrote that thinking maybe someone would save him, but I never expected you'd save me." She shook her head. "You saved each other." Outside the clinic window, dawn was starting to push at the edges of the dark, and for the first time in a long time, the boy who had once been forced to run had nowhere to go, because the message he sent out had found its way home, and now, so had he. Kieran didn't speak much during the first few weeks. He didn't need to. His days were simple. He'd wake up before the sun rose, step out into the shelter yard with Ranger close beside him, and just be. No phone, no noise, no timeline. Sometimes he sat under the tree behind the kennel runs with his hands buried in Ranger's coat, his face quiet, unreadable. Sometimes he helped Helen sort intake paperwork or fed the newest arrivals. And sometimes he just sat in silence with the tiny puppy he'd rescued from the warehouse, now thriving under his care, and aptly named Wish. People asked questions, of course. Journalists still emailed the shelter, wanting the full story, but Ethan blocked every request. The shelter had agreed as a team. This story didn't belong to the world. It belonged to Kieran and Ranger, and the quiet bond that had outlasted everything meant to break it. What no one could deny was how much had changed since their reunion. Ranger, once slow and limping, now ran with the kind of abandon usually reserved for dogs half his age. He would leap and spin, and then settle back beside Kieran with a soft grunt, as if to say, "Okay, you can breathe now. I'm still here." Kieran had begun laughing again, quiet, guarded at first, but then deeper, warmer. Helen would hear it sometimes while walking past the garden window, and it made her heart ache in a way that only healing can. One afternoon, while cleaning the front office, Helen found something unexpected. A new letter, folded, untitled, but unmistakably written in Kieran's handwriting. She didn't open it. Instead, she walked outside, past the kennels, and found Kieran sitting under the tree again, Ranger resting at his feet and Wish curled up in his lap. She handed the paper to him without a word. He looked down, took a breath, and nodded. "Can I read it to you?" Helen sat beside him. "Only if you want to." Kieran unfolded the letter. His voice shook, but not from fear. "To the person who found my dog, you didn't just save him. You saved me in every way that matters. When I wrote that note, I didn't think anyone would care. I thought I was giving up, but Ranger wasn't. He never did. He waited for you to prove me wrong. I didn't think people like you existed. The kind who stop their cars in the rain, who sit on floors with dogs too afraid to stand, who see a bruised, starving shepherd and don't ask where he came from, but ask who he's waiting for. He was waiting for me, and somehow, because of you, I'm still here too. Thank you for not treating my dog like an animal too far gone, and thank you for not treating me like one either." Kieran paused then and lowered the page. Helen blinked back tears, swallowing hard. "You don't need to thank us, Kieran. We didn't rescue you. We just held the door open. You walked through it. Kieran looked over at her. Then let me hold the door for someone else. That night, he asked Ethan for a job. By the end of the month, Kieran was officially hired as a junior animal care technician. The announcement went out not with a press release, but with a simple change on the staff board. His name, handwritten on a white strip, pinned just below Helen's. Ranger came with him every day. Wish, now a wild, happy ball of fur with ears too big for her head, spent most afternoons chasing shadows in the staff lounge. And then one morning, a girl walked into the shelter, barely 14, silent and cold with fear. Her file said she'd been through 3 foster homes in 8 months. No placement had lasted, no therapy stuck. She flinched when people raised their voice, wouldn't make eye contact, until she saw Ranger. He didn't move when she approached, just stared at her with those amber eyes and blinked slowly. The girl froze, then knelt. He placed his paw on her knee. She smiled, and when Helen asked her later what made her feel safe, the girl answered simply, "He reminds me of me." Kieran overheard and said nothing. But that evening, he printed out a photo of Ranger with that same girl sitting beside him and pinned it to the bulletin board above his workspace. Underneath, he wrote in pencil, "The message was never just for me." Months passed, then a year. The story faded from the public, as all stories eventually do. But not from the people who lived it. Not from Kieran, who earned his vet tech certification and now spoke at local schools. Not from the girl who came back every week just to brush Ranger's coat. Not from Helen, who kept the original note in her desk drawer and sometimes read it when the world felt a little too heavy. And not from Ranger, whose body aged, but whose eyes never stopped watching the door. Not out of fear anymore, but out of hope, because once someone waited for him. And now he waited for the next soul who needed to know they were not forgotten. The letter Kieran once tied to his leg had only said a few words, but what it meant carried on in every poor step. Every hand reached out in trust, every broken heart that dared to believe in one more beginning. Because love like that doesn't end, it gets passed on.